The arena was charged with energy. Thousands of spectators filled the seats, bright lights shining down on the smooth mat at the center. Camera drones moved quietly overhead while commentators spoke with anticipation. This was not presented as a routine exhibition. It had been promoted as a meeting of two legends. On one side stood Chuck Norris. He appeared relaxed and confident, smiling as he absorbed the cheers of the crowd. Every step he took carried the weight of years of reputation, victories, and stories that had grown into legend. The audience responded warmly, and he clearly knew how to draw strength from it. Across from him stood Steven Seagal. There was no dramatic entrance or exaggerated motion. He remained calm and composed, dressed in simple training attire, arms resting naturally at his sides. His expression was steady, his posture controlled. While the crowd's attention focused on Chuck, Steven observed quietly, as if the noise around him had little meaning. Chuck glanced toward Steven and smiled with amusement. Leaning toward the microphone, he laughed and shook his head. "Seriously," he said, "this is what they call a fighting style now, Aikido." The audience reacted immediately with laughter. Chuck began to move slowly around Steven, circling him with confidence as if measuring his opponent. "Let's be honest," he continued. "Aikido looks impressive on screen, but in a real arena," he paused and shrugged. "It's just choreography." The laughter grew louder. Steven did not respond. His silence only encouraged Chuck. Chuck exaggerated slow movements, lifting his arms in a mocking imitation. The commentators joined in, one of them joking that Steven appeared frozen. Steven raised his eyes calmly, his expression unchanged. Chuck stepped closer. "So tell me," he said, now standing only inches away, "are you here to fight or to meditate?" Again, there was no reply. The crowd began chanting Chuck's name. Then, in what seemed like a small moment at the time, Chuck reached out and firmly grabbed Steven's wrist. A nearby security official shifted uneasily. The commentators stopped talking. Steven finally spoke, his voice quiet and steady. "Don't touch me again." Chuck laughed. "Or what?" Steven slowly rotated his wrist just slightly. In that instant, the atmosphere changed. The noise softened, and something subtle but important shifted in the arena. What followed would later be replayed countless times. The crowd did not fall silent immediately. After Steven's warning, confidence still filled the space. Confidence in Chuck. Cameras zoomed closer. Commentators lowered their voices. Thousands of eyes focused on the two men standing face to face. Chuck chuckled and shook his head. "Did you hear that?" he said into the microphone. "Don't touch me again." He turned toward the audience, spreading his arms. "This isn't a quiet ritual. This is an arena." Cheers followed. Steven remained motionless. His wrist returned to a relaxed position, fingers loose, posture upright. He had not pulled away or prepared for impact. That stillness made some spectators uneasy. Chuck stepped in again. "You know what your problem is," he said, lowering his voice. "You count on people not wanting to hurt you." Steven met his gaze. "I count on people making mistakes," he replied calmly. A few murmurs moved through the crowd. Chuck scoffed. "Big words for someone who hasn't moved." He raised his hands into a loose stance, not fully aggressive, but clearly asserting control. The referees exchanged looks, unsure whether this remained performance or was becoming something else. Chuck flicked a quick jab toward Steven's shoulder, not with full force, just enough to test him. Steven shifted his weight slightly. The punch narrowly missed. To most viewers, it looked like chance. Chuck smiled. "See, I could have hit you any time." Steven did not correct him. Instead, he took one slow step forward. The arena grew quieter. Chuck resumed circling, now more cautious, though he masked it with commentary. "This is real fighting," he said. "Pressure, speed, control." "Speed without balance is just noise," Steven replied. The line landed unexpectedly hard. The commentators stopped laughing. Phones began to rise in the stands as people sensed a shift. Not action yet, but tension. Chuck exhaled sharply. "You think you're teaching me?" "No," Steven said evenly. "I'm giving you an opportunity to stop." That statement erased Chuck's smile. He stepped in quickly, grabbing Steven's arm again, this time with purpose. Security leaned forward. Referees tensed. The crowd held its breath. Do you really believe Aikido works in a real fight? Chuck asked. Yes or no? Steven allowed the grip. For the first time that evening, Chuck felt something unexpected. Not pain or resistance, but doubt. Steven's balance did not shift. Chuck's did. For a moment, the arena seemed to stop breathing. Chuck loosened his grip without realizing it, his expression tightening. Something felt wrong. He had handled many opponents before. Strong, fast, skilled. But this felt different. Steven remained relaxed, shoulders loose, posture aligned, as if the hold had no effect. Chuck stepped back slightly and raised his voice. Nice trick, he said. You almost convinced me something happened. The laughter returned, but it lacked certainty. You're using your arms, Steven said calmly, not your center. Chuck scoffed, giving lessons now. I'm explaining why you're uncomfortable. The remark unsettled the crowd. Chuck's frustration was visible. He raised his voice again. I see someone hiding behind concepts, balance, flow, theory, but real fights don't care about philosophy. Steven nodded once. Neither does gravity. The referees exchanged another look. The tone had clearly changed. Chuck moved in fast and shoved Steven's chest. Gasps spread through the audience. Steven slid back smoothly, maintaining control. He did not stumble. Security stood up behind the barricades. Someone shouted a warning. Chuck followed, energized by the tension. What's wrong? He mocked. Still calm? Steven looked at him steadily. You don't need to prove anything. You already know this isn't what you expected. Chuck froze briefly, then reacted with anger. You think I'm afraid of you? He lunged, grabbing Steven's arm with both hands, pulling hard in an attempt to dominate and break his balance. The crowd erupted. Steven adjusted his footing slightly. A small turn of the hips, nothing dramatic. Chuck's pull went nowhere. Instead, Chuck felt his own stance weaken, as he struggled to stay grounded. For the first time, he had to work simply to remain upright. The laughter stopped entirely. Phones rose higher, red recording lights scattered through the stands. Steven leaned in slightly. You're forcing it, he said. That's why it feels heavy. Chuck pulled again, harder. A dull discomfort ran through his wrist. Not sharp pain, but enough to cause hesitation. The arena buzzed with nervous anticipation. Chuck released the grip suddenly and stepped back, shaking out his hand. Enough talking, he said. Let's see how balance handles speed. Steven straightened, hands open, stance neutral. That's what I was hoping for. The crowd leaned forward together. Chuck dropped into a true fighting stance, focused and serious. Steven remained still. The space between them felt charged. This was no longer about mocking or styles. It was about control. And as silence settled over the arena, one question hung in the air. What happens when raw force meets complete calm? Breathing remained controlled, though heavier than before. The confidence was still present, but it had changed. It was no longer relaxed or casual. It had become focused, precise, and restrained. What remained was intent. Across from him, Steven Seagal stood calmly. His hands were open at his sides. His knees stayed loose. His eyes remained fixed forward. He did not raise his guard. He did not take a traditional fighting stance. To anyone unfamiliar with combat, it appeared careless, even dismissive. But those with experience felt something different entirely. Why isn't he defending himself? Someone whispered quietly. Because he doesn't believe he needs to. Another voice answered. Chuck Norris moved first. He stepped forward slowly, testing distance. Steven did not react. Chuck took another step. Still, there was no movement. The space between them narrowed to less than an arm's length. At that moment, everyone watching understood the seriousness of what was unfolding. Two highly respected fighters, two very different systems. One moment of misjudgment could change everything. Chuck finally spoke, his voice low and steady. There was no microphone now. The words were meant only for the man in front of him. You know, Chuck said quietly. People have questioned Aikido for a long time. Steven acknowledged him with a small nod. I know, he replied. They say it only works when the other person cooperates. Steven's mouth curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something close. His expression remained calm. "They're right," he said. "They just misunderstand who is cooperating." Chuck's brow tightened. "What does that mean?" Steven didn't respond verbally. Instead, he shifted his weight. It was a small movement, almost invisible. His hips adjusted slightly, like parts of a machine aligning. It wasn't dramatic, but it was deliberate. Chuck sensed it immediately. Not through contact, but through instinct. His shoulders tightened. He didn't like the uncertainty. He didn't like not knowing what Steven intended to do. Chuck feinted left, quick and sharp. Steven stepped forward. The move made no sense according to standard striking principles. Most systems emphasize distance, guarding, and retreat. Steven did the opposite. He closed the gap. Chuck's feint transformed into a genuine strike mid-motion. His fist moved forward with speed and control, aimed cleanly. Steven rotated his body slightly. The punch passed by his shoulder, missing by only inches. At the same time, Steven's hand made light contact with Chuck's forearm. It was not a block. It was not a grab. It was a guide. Chuck extended just a fraction too far. To the audience, it appeared insignificant. Almost nothing happened, but to Chuck, it felt like losing footing on a slick surface. The sensation was immediate and unsettling. He corrected himself quickly and regained his stance. His posture remained strong, but his expression changed, his eyes narrowed. This was no longer a demonstration. He was now analyzing every movement. "You keep stepping into danger," Chuck said carefully. Steven responded without raising his voice. "You keep creating it." Chuck attacked again. This time it was a full combination. Clean, structured, efficient. The kind of controlled sequence that had ended many fights before. Steven did not step back. He stepped in. Each strike missed its target by margins that were too precise to be accidental. Every time, Steven's body shifted just enough. His feet moved in subtle arcs, tracing paths that were invisible to most viewers. His hands made brief contact, sometimes at the wrist, sometimes at the elbow or shoulder. The touches were light but intentional. He redirected force instead of meeting it. He guided momentum rather than resisting it. There was no clash, no obvious power exchange. The crowd remained silent, not because nothing was happening, but because something unusual was taking place. Chuck was exerting effort. Steven was controlling space. Chuck's breathing became louder. Steven's did not. A commentator finally spoke, breaking the quiet tension. "I've never seen this," he said under his breath. "It's like Chuck is fighting the space itself." Chuck felt it as well. Every time he tried to move forward, the ground seemed to shift against him. Every time he attempted to reset his position, the angle felt wrong. His balance wasn't gone, but it was constantly at risk. He wasn't losing control, but he was never fully comfortable. Each adjustment he made forced another correction. Each strike required a recovery. Steven's presence distorted the rhythm of the exchange without ever appearing aggressive. Steven still hadn't thrown a strike. He didn't need to. Chuck paused briefly, reassessing. His stance remained solid. His discipline was intact, but now there was caution mixed with focus. He understood that force alone would not solve this. Steven remained relaxed, centered, and precise. His posture never changed. His guard never rose. His eyes stayed calm. The difference in approach became increasingly clear. Chuck was applying technique to overcome resistance. Steven was removing resistance altogether. Every motion Steven made served a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was rushed. He allowed Chuck to move first, to commit, to define the direction, then subtly altered it. The exchange continued in this pattern. Chuck initiated. Steven adjusted. Chuck adapted. Steven redirected. The audience watched closely, not as spectators of spectacle, but as witnesses to a technical conversation between two masters. There was no showmanship, no exaggeration, just method, structure, and intent. Chuck exhaled deeply. He had faced many opponents before, stronger, faster, younger. But this was different. This was not about strength or speed. This was about control without confrontation. Steven stood exactly where he needed to be. Never more, never less. His movements remained efficient. His energy remained steady. And for the first time, Chuck understood the statement Steven had made earlier. Cooperation wasn't submission. It was inevitability. The balance was still intact. The exchange was still respectful. But the dynamic had shifted, not through force, through understanding. He stepped back once more, shaking his head slightly. "This isn't finished," he said, almost under his breath. Steven responded with a small nod. "It never is," he answered calmly. "Until it is." The tension inside the arena had reached a breaking point. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, hands gripping armrests, phones forgotten mid-recording. No one wanted to look away because everyone could sense it. Something was coming. Not a punch, not a throw, but a choice. Was Steven avoiding the confrontation? Or was he managing it? Comment below, avoiding or controlling. Chuck released a slow breath, steadying himself. He understood what needed to happen next. The testing was over. The hesitation was done. This time, he would commit fully. As he moved forward again, planting his foot firmly and shifting his weight, preparing to release everything he had, Steven adjusted only once. That single movement was enough for the entire arena to feel it. Whatever followed, there would be no reversal. The air felt thick, as if the building itself had paused to watch. Chuck Norris set his stance and centered his balance, eyes fixed on the man in front of him. The crowd noticed the change immediately. The humor was gone. The confidence display had faded. What remained was an experienced fighter facing something unfamiliar. Across the mat, Steven Seagal remained exactly the same. Calm posture, open hands, the same quiet certainty. Chuck took another measured breath and stepped in with full intent. No distractions this time. No probing movements. He drove forward with speed and force, delivering a straight punch designed to overwhelm, followed by a hard step meant to close distance and remove any chance of retreat. It was the kind of entry meant to break hesitation and punish delay. Steven did not step away. Instead, he moved toward the attack. To the audience, the motion seemed almost invisible. A partial step, a rotation of the hips, a slight change in shoulder alignment. Steven's left hand met Chuck's wrist at the precise moment of contact, not to block it, but to redirect it. Chuck felt the shift immediately. The energy he had created didn't vanish. It changed direction. Steven's right hand slid smoothly to Chuck's elbow as his body turned with controlled precision, like a door swinging freely on its hinge. Chuck's punch missed its target and continued forward, pulling his balance off center. Steven was already positioned. The hold was not tight. The action was not aggressive, yet Chuck's arm was no longer under his control. A wave of gasps moved through the crowd. Chuck reacted instinctively, trying to pull back, but that response only strengthened the movement already in motion. Steven stepped through, guiding the arm in a clean arc, aligning Chuck's forward drive with gravity itself. The result wasn't violent or dramatic. It was unavoidable. With one final adjustment of weight, Steven completed the motion. The impact came next. Chuck landed flat on his back, the sound echoing across the arena like a heavy object dropped on wood. Silence followed. No cheers, no shouting, just disbelief. Steven stood over him, still holding the arm. It wasn't bent unnaturally. It wasn't strained. It was simply controlled. His posture remained relaxed, breathing steady, as though nothing remarkable had taken place. Chuck stared up at the lights, chest rising quickly. He wasn't injured, but he was clearly shaken. Steven released the arm immediately and stepped away, giving space. No follow-up, no display of dominance, no celebration, only restraint. The referee moved in, then paused, uncertain about what required intervention. Chuck rolled to his side and slowly pushed himself upright. His eyes were wide now, not with frustration, but with understanding. He rotated his wrist, tested his shoulder. Everything worked normally. Somehow, that made the moment feel heavier. Then the crowd responded. The arena erupted, not with laughter or shock alone, but with respect. People stood from every section, applause building like a wave. He didn't even strike him. He used everything Chuck gave him. Chuck was fully upright now, staring at Steven as though seeing him clearly for the first time. "You didn't force it," Chuck said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Steven nodded. "I didn't have to." Chuck looked down at the mat, then back up. A slow smile appeared, genuine and unguarded. "I've spent my life relying on power," he said. "You just showed me another way." Steven inclined his head in acknowledgement, respectfully. "Power ends things," he said. "Control prevents them." The applause intensified. Was that pure skill or something beyond technique? Comment below, skill or control. Steven extended his hand. Chuck accepted it. The two men stood side by side. Legends were no longer separated by ego, but linked through awareness. As the sound in the arena grew and cameras tracked every detail, a single reality became clear to everyone watching. The technique itself was not the most surprising element. What truly stood out was how little effort Steven actually needed. When raw force meets balance, force does not prevail. The applause did not end quickly. It moved across the arena in steady waves, rising and falling, unwilling to stop. People stood, not because they had seen aggression, but because they had witnessed clarity, something uncommon and precise. Chuck remained near the center of the mat, his shoulders lifting and lowering as he brought his breathing under control. The adrenaline was present, but the strain had disappeared. He looked around at the audience, the cameras, the officials, and then back toward Steven. For a brief moment, he said nothing. He only nodded. It was a small motion, but it carried weight. "I felt it before I hit the mat," Chuck said at last, his voice projecting without a microphone. "The moment I committed, it was already over." The commentators stopped speaking. Steven stayed calm, as he always did. That silence was expected. Chuck released a soft breath that almost resembled a laugh. "You know what's ironic?" he continued. "I came in believing this was about styles, about proving a point." He motioned toward the place where he had fallen. "But that wasn't really a fight, was it?" Steven shook his head. "It was a lesson." The word hung in the air. Lesson, not loss, not embarrassment. The audience understood the shift immediately. This was no longer a contest. It had turned into recognition. Chuck stepped forward and extended his hand again. There was no performance, no concern for the cameras. The handshake was solid and sincere. Two men who clearly understood what had just occurred. "I underestimated you," Chuck admitted plainly, "and your discipline." Steven accepted the statement without pride. "Most people do," he replied, "until they don't." A referee cleared his throat, uncertain whether the event had officially ended. The program listed it as an exhibition. The crowd wanted more, but not another exchange. They wanted understanding. Chuck turned toward the audience and signaled for a microphone. When it reached him, he paused, choosing each word carefully. "I've spent years believing strength was the solution," he said. "Tonight showed me that strength isn't always force." He looked back at Steven. "Sometimes it's restraint." The arena reacted again, louder than before. Steven lifted one hand slightly, easing the noise. He took the microphone, his tone steady and unhurried. "Strength doesn't need to announce itself," he said, "and control doesn't ask for approval." The audience leaned forward. Phones rose again. Steven continued, "When people ridicule what they don't understand, it's often because they're afraid of what it might reveal about them." Chuck nodded, not offended. If anything, relieved. Cameras captured everything. The body language, the expressions, the clear shift from tension to mutual respect. This was the moment that would be replayed, trimmed, and studied. Another official approached and quietly spoke to Chuck, likely suggesting it was time to conclude. Chuck waved him aside. "One last thing," he said, turning back to Steven. Then he bowed. Not exaggerated. Not for show, a genuine bow. The arena fell silent, surprised by the gesture. Steven returned the bow in the same understated manner. In that quiet moment, something settled. There was no win-winner and no loser. Only two paths crossing briefly in honesty. Was this about victory or understanding? Comment below, win or understanding. As the event ended, people didn't rush out. They stayed talking among themselves, replaying what they had seen. This wasn't just a demonstration. It was an ego dissolving in real time. As the lights dimmed and the mat was cleared, one idea echoed louder than the applause had. True mastery isn't loud. It doesn't seek validation. It waits calmly until force reveals itself. And when it does, it responds. By the time the lights lowered and the crowd finally began to move, the story had already left the building. Clips were spreading everywhere. Phones vibrated, alerts stacked up, and headlines formed instantly. One movement settles the argument, control over power. When mockery met mastery, the footage spread within minutes, slowed down, zoomed in, reviewed frame by frame. Viewers watched repeatedly, trying to understand how something so controlled could be so decisive. Yet the real discussion wasn't about the technique. It focused on what followed. The respect, the restraint, the lack of ego. In interviews later that evening, Chuck didn't deflect or joke. He didn't downplay the moment. He took responsibility. "I went in thinking I already knew the answer," he said. "I left realizing I still had something to learn." That statement spread quickly on its own. Steven, on the other hand, avoided attention completely. No celebration, no long explanations. When asked for comment, he kept it brief. "Technique matters," he said, "but intention matters more." Fans debated non-stop. Was it timing, skill, experience? Martial artists analyzed foot placement and angles. Commentators debated philosophy. Some remained skeptical. Others were convinced immediately. But no one denied what they witnessed. Force committed fully and was guided safely to the ground. Ego encountered calm and quietly stepped aside. Days later, the moment was still trending. Reaction videos continued to appear. Coaches shared the clip with students. Viewers with no prior interest in martial arts watched with curiosity, because it wasn't simply a confrontation. It was a reflection. A reminder that loud confidence is not the same as control. That mockery often hides misunderstanding, and that true mastery doesn't need approval to exist. In a follow-up post that gathered millions of likes, Chuck summarized it simply: "I went in to test a man. I walked out respecting a discipline." Steven shared nothing. He didn't need to. The moment spoke clearly on its own. If you believe real strength comes from discipline, control, and humility, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more powerful fictional stories like this. Because sometimes the most surprising move isn't the one that ends a fight.